Cimoooooooo!
What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So I've been feeling rather nostalgic lately working on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Progression series, and so I wanted to work on a series of top 10s that cover the top 10 monsters of any given type throughout Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history. So featured here today, we have the top 10 Beast Warriors of all time. Now, we've already covered the top 10 Aqua monsters as well as the top 10 Beast monsters. If you want to check those videos out, those links will be down in the description. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to be covering Beast Warriors. This list isn't in any particular order. It's actually purely alphabetical, so let's not waste any more time and get right into it. So for our first Beast Warrior, we're already going to turn up the heat because we actually have a tie between two Beast Warriors that come from the same archetype, but they're both equally as important, so I wanted to group them together, and those cards are Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Bear and Tiger King. Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Bear has an effect that reads, once per turn, when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can set one Fire Formation spell directly from your deck. Once per turn, you can send one face-up Fire Formation spell or trap you control to the graveyard, then target one monster on the field, destroy that target. There's a reason why this card exceeded $80, $90, even $100 on its initial release, and that's because this card was absurdly powerful. Paired with a card like Fire Formation Tenki could search Bear, then you could then normal summon Bear, use Bear's effect to get rid of the Tenki to pop one of your opponent's monsters, Bear could attack directly, get you another copy of Tenki, and essentially the cycle would repeat. When Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a much simpler game, Bear did essentially everything you could ever ask for in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card, and that's why it made its way onto this list. And then Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Tiger King requires 2 level 4 Beast Warriors to summon. When this card is Xyz summoned, you can set one Fire Formation spell or trap directly from your deck. Once per turn, you can detach one material from this card, negate the effects of all face-up effect monsters currently on the field, except Beast Warriors, until the end of your opponent's turn. And when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can send 3 Fire Formation spell traps you control to the graveyard, special summon 2 level 4 lower Beast Warrior monsters with the same attack from your deck in face-up defense position. Now, that last effect seldom ever came up, but we're mainly focused on the first 2 effects. First of all, anytime you Xyz summon Tiger King, you are able to get a free Fire Formation spell or trap directly from your deck. And with cards like Fire Formation Tenki to search any of the other Fire Fist cards in your deck, Fire Formation TENSU, which bestows you with an additional normal summon, it was a great way to regenerate some of the advantage lost from Xyz summoning into Tiger King. And then if that weren't enough, by detaching an Xyz material, you were able to negate the effects of all face-up effect monsters on the field except Beast Warriors until the end of your opponent's turn. Having a one-sided skill drain that solely benefits you and is just a huge boon to the Fire Fist strategy was a great way just to top off an already powerful archetype. Now, for our second card, even though some of these Beast Warriors may seem a little bit slow by modern standards, when Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a much slower game, these cards would absolutely dominate. So that card is Bujin Yamato. Bujin Yamato reads, once per turn during your end phase, you can add one Bujin monster from your deck to your hand, then send one card from your hand to the graveyard. You can only control one Bujin Yamato. A relatively simple effect, and it may not seem that powerful, but Bujin was actually a tier 1 deck back in its prime. Bujin Yamato was the centerpiece of the Bujin archetype, which was a very protect the castle style of deck. Essentially, you wanted to get your Yamato on the field and stick it, and essentially protect it at all costs. With cards like Bujingi Hare and Bujingi Turtle to protect Yamato from destruction or targeting respectively, it was actually rather annoying and difficult to clear off a single Yamato. Pair this with cards like Kaiser Coliseum to limit the amount of monsters on the field, and Vanity's Emptiness to pretty much deter any form of special summoning, and Bujin was a very terrifying deck. And with each turn that would progress, Bujin would become more and more frightening, with options like Mikazuchi overlaying into Xyz monsters like Susanoo. There were so many powerful threats within the Bujin strategy, and you even had a card that a lot of people still have PTSD from, Bujingi Crane, which could double the attack power of a Bujin monster to help close games out rather quickly. Bujin is actually a very beloved archetype, but it all stems from Yamato because the deck lives or dies by it, and that's why Bujin Yamato had to make the list. list. So next up, we're going to be taking a trip all the way back to Gladiator's Assault, and if you played back during Gladiator Beast format, you know exactly where we're going, because for our next card, we have Gladiator Beast HERAKLINOS. Gladiator Beast HERAKLINOS requires a copy of Laquari and 2 Gladiator Beast monsters to fusion summon. Must first be special summoned by your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. You do not use polymerization. During either player's turn, when a spell or trap card is activated, you can discard 1 card, negate the activation, and destroy it. This card must be face up on the field to activate and resolve this effect. For people wondering why that effect of HERAKLINOS sounds familiar, it's because it's actually on another card that old school players would be familiar with, being Solemn Judgment. So what could be better than Solemn Judgment than having a Solemn Judgment-like effect paired with a 3000 attack monster? Gladiator Beast HERAKLINOS was a $150 to $200 card back in its day because Gladiator Beast just power crept so many previous Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetypes, and this is one of the reasons why. Notice too how there is no once per turn clause anywhere on HERAKLINOS' text, which means you can effectively blank and negate every single one of your opponent's spells and traps for as long as HERAKLINOS remains on the field. This made it very difficult to out because you couldn't use spells or traps as long as your opponent had cards in their hand, and being a 3000 attack body made it enormously difficult to run over in battle. Gladiator Beast HERAKLINOS was an absolute beast, and it's no surprise that it found its way onto the top 10 Beast Warriors of all time. Now for our next card, we've got something that strikes tons of fear into a large portion of the player base because this card's responsible for some of the most degenerate loops ever conceived, and that card is Gransoil the Elemental Lord. Gransoil the Elemental Lord is one of those cards that has received an errata and no longer is nearly as frightening as it used to be, but that doesn't take away from how devastating it truly was. The pre-errata text on Gransoil read, cannot be normal summon or set. Must be special summoned from your hand by having exactly 5 earth monsters in your graveyard, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. When this card is special summoned, you can target 1 monster in either player's graveyard, special summon that target to your side of the field. If this card leaves the field, skip the battle phase of your next turn. Again, notice how there's no once per turn clause on Gransoil's text, which means if there was a way to possibly bounce Gransoil back to your hand and then resummon it again if you still have 5 earth monsters in the graveyard, you would then be able to use the effect again to resurrect a monster. And in the top 10 beast monsters of all time, we talked about Dulorn, Tiger King of the Ice Barrier, being infamous for bouncing cards back to the hand, so you can maybe see where we're going with this. Dulorn combined with Gransoil would enable some incredibly degenerate loops, allowing you to bounce Gransoil back to your hand, special summon it again, resurrect a monster back to your field, which could be another copy of Dulorn when Dulorn was at more than 1 copy. Then you'd be able to use the new copy of Dulorn, bounce Gransoil once again back to your hand. The combo goes on and on and on. Gransoil became even more frightening with the introduction of Link monsters in Master Rule 4, thanks due in part to Firewall Dragon. And with Gransoil, it was really easy to assemble multiple Firewall Dragons onto the field and constantly abuse their effects even more than they were initially intended. And so it's no surprise that Gransoil ultimately ended up on the Forbidden list. However, some time passed and Gransoil actually received an errata, and that errata solved a majority of the problems with the card while also making it unplayable, so it was okay to come off the list. While Gransoil virtually sees no play today, it was one of the most terrifying combo enablers of all time, and that's simply due to the fact that it didn't have a hard once per turn clause. So we're about halfway through, coming in at number 5, and this is actually one of the most recent bannings that we've had for Beast Warriors, and I think there's a very good reason for that, because that card is LUNALIGHT Tiger. LUNALIGHT Tiger is a pendulum monster with a pendulum effect that reads, once per turn you can target 1 LUNALIGHT monster in your graveyard, special summon it, but it cannot attack, its effects are negated, also it is destroyed during the end phase. So although LUNALIGHT Tiger has a soft once per turn effect, you would think with all the negatives that come with it that LUNALIGHT Tiger wouldn't be that good of a card. The monster can't attack, its effects are negated, and you're gonna lose it at the end phase anyway. But that doesn't matter when you can just use the monster for Xyz material, for Link material, and the fact that you can abuse LUNALIGHT Tiger multiple times in a turn because it has a soft once per turn clause, meaning if it's bounced back to the hand or if you play another copy of it, it's a new copy of LUNALIGHT Tiger which has yet to activate its effect. Combined with cards like LUNALIGHT Yellow Martin and Blackwing Zephyros the Elite, it wasn't unrealistic to see LUNALIGHT players utilizing the effect of LUNALIGHT Tiger 2, if not 3 times in a turn, generating them tons of advantage and enabling them to do some very degenerate combos. Even its monster effect, which allows you to target a LUNALIGHT monster in your graveyard and special summon it, that is a hard once per turn, so clearly they weren't incapable of putting a hard once per turn on this effect, is actually still pretty decent, so even if you have to use it as a monster, it's not the worst. But ultimately, Tiger met its fate when LUNALIGHT was just getting so out of hand because the entire archetype is devoid of hard once per turn effects, and LUNALIGHT Tiger being so easy to abuse and being very difficult to disrupt is one of the reasons why it ultimately ended up on the ban list and why it ultimately ended up on the top 10 Beast Warriors of all time. But for our next card, we're going to be taking a journey all the way back to Invasion of Chaos. Talk about a trip, right? But there's a reason for it, because talk about degenerate loops, this card was probably one of the granddaddies of them, and that card is Manticore of Darkness. During the end phase of the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can send to the graveyard one Beast Warrior, or Winged Beast monster from your hand or your side of the field, special summon this card from your graveyard. Doesn't seem too powerful until you realize that you can use the effect of Manticore of Darkness on another copy of Manticore of Darkness and essentially create an infinite loop. Because of this loop, Manticore of Darkness would actually be an enabler for some of the very first FTK strategies. Funny enough, when Max C was still legal, Manticore of Darkness was actually a way to out this, because you could forcibly make your opponent draw their entire deck, because every time Manticore of Darkness would get summoned, they have to draw a card, because Max C is a mandatory effect, so you could effectively deck them out if you could establish a Manticore of Darkness loop. I don't think Manticore of Darkness was initially intended to function this way, although it wasn't ultra rare, so maybe it was, but by modern Yu-Gi-Oh standards, it was definitely a card that was begging to be abused, because once again, it did not have a once per turn clause. A bit of a gimmicky card, but it has a rather interesting place in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and that's why I decided to put it on this list. Now, for our next card, when this card was initially announced, people lost their minds, because a card like this had never been conceived before in Yu-Gi-Oh, and that card is Reborn Tengu. Reborn Tengu might be one of the simplest Yu-Gi-Oh cards ever printed. Its effect reads, if this face-up card leaves the field, special summon one Reborn Tengu from your deck. Leaves the field is typically not a piece of text you see on a Yu-Gi-Oh card. Traditionally, you would see text like destroyed by battle, destroyed by card effect, even just destroyed period, but leaves the field makes this a little bit more special. This means that if Reborn Tengu gets tributed over to tribute summon a monster, if it gets bounced back to the hand, if it gets banished, it will always trigger its effect. And by replacing itself, it gave you another monster on the field to be able to continue comboing off. Back when it was initially released, the Synchro era was in full force, and being able to use Reborn Tengu to Synchro summon any monster meant that you not only got that Synchro monster, but then you could summon another Reborn Tengu in addition to that. Reborn Tengu has had so much flexibility as a card and has really opened people's creative thinking as to what they could potentially do with it. Reborn Tengu was so powerful that it actually found its way onto the semi-limited list for a time, because being able to spam 3 copies of Reborn Tengu was apparently too much for combo players. Reborn Tengu perfectly exemplifies the philosophy that less is more, and I really wish more Yu-Gi-Oh cards would take this design, but with that design comes a lot of power, and for those reasons, that's why Reborn Tengu had to make its way onto this list. So for our next card, for all of you hand loop lovers out there, this card is for you, because for number 8, we've got Wind Up Hunter. Wind Up Hunter reads, you can tribute one face-up wind-up monster except Wind Up Hunter, send one random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. This effect can only be used once while this card is face-up on the field. So while Wind Up Hunter does have a bit of a once per turn clause built into it, that really doesn't matter when you can get multiple copies onto the field or resurrect multiple copies to use them multiple times and completely rip every card out of your opponent's hand. With cards like Wind Up Zenmaity and the entirety of the Wind Up archetype, like Wind Up Magician and Wind Up Shark, it really was not too difficult to achieve a full hand loop and really just win the game on turn 1. Funny enough, Wind Up Hunter is actually forbidden in the OCG, but it's at 3 here in the TCG, but that's because we have Zenmaity banned instead. Players who got introduced to Yu-Gi-Oh around the time that Photon Shockwave was released probably are traumatized by the fact that Wind Up Hunter existed and was even allowed to see any play. While it may be degenerate, it's a significant part of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and one of the reasons why it's on the top 10 Beast Warriors of all time. Now we're nearing the end of the video and only have a couple Beast Warriors left, but I don't think there is a card in maybe all of Yu-Gi-Oh! That creates more of an agitating feeling than this card, and that card is Wolf Lightsworn Beast. Wolf's effect reads, cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned by a card effect. If this card is sent from your deck to the graveyard, special summon it. Again, a relatively simple effect, but the Lightsworn archetype took advantage of this very well. Lightsworn's big mechanic is milling cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard, and so at any point, if you were to mill a copy of Wolf, you would get a 2100 attack level 4 for absolutely free. Now, seeing one copy of Wolf was frustrating enough, but there were moments where players would mill 3 to 4 cards for the effect of one of their Lightsworn cards, and end up seeing 2, if not 3 copies of Wolf in that mill, which meant that your opponent would get to summon all of them. Again, due to a lack of a once per turn clause, this was a huge payoff for the Lightsworn deck being able to easily swarm the field and get a lot of damage in relatively quickly. When Lightsworn was first released, there wasn't really a way to get numerous monsters onto the field at the same rate as a deck that Lightsworn could do because of a card like Wolf's existence. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Lightsworn was a tier 1 deck back in the day. Even modern iterations of Lightsworn decks that have cut down significantly on the number of Lightsworn cards available still played numerous copies of Wolf just in case they were able to hit that lucky mill and summon additional copies to their field to help them extend their combos. There's a reason why Lightsworn became notorious and synonymous with the term Sacksworn, because if you were a Lightsworn player and you always hit Wolf off of your mills, then you are always going to be making your opponent feel bad. When you're facing down a Lightsworn player and they're milling their cards, you're never expecting to see a copy of Wolf and you're really hoping it just got stuck in their hand, but they always mill it and you're always going to be grunting about it. Wolf is one of the reasons why Lightsworn had such a lasting legacy throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and that's the reason why it made its way onto this list. And so that brings us to the 10th and final Beast Warrior of all time, and if you're keeping track of your ABCs, you might notice that we're at the end of the alphabet, and if there's a Beast Warrior archetype synonymous with the letter Z, you know it's gotta be ZOODIAC. Now, if I had to pick a single monster to represent the ZOODIAC archetype, I'd probably go with ZOODIAC DRIDENT, but realistically, the entire ZOODIAC archetype could be the entire top 10 Beast Warrior list. ZOODIAC inherently broke the Xyz summoning mechanic because traditionally you needed 2 or more monsters of a specific level to be able to overlay to make an Xyz monster. ZOODIAC, however, changed that by only needing 1 monster to overlay on top, and you could overlay multiple ZOODIAC monsters on top of one another. And if that weren't enough, each ZOODIAC monster you laid on top of the next would not only have its own ability, but absorb the attack and defensive stats of the ZOODIAC monsters beneath it. But ZOODIAC DRIDENT was definitely the star of the show. Once per turn, you could Xyz summon ZOODIAC DRIDENT by using one ZOODIAC monster you control with a different name as Xyz material. If you used an Xyz material, any Xyz materials attached to it also become Xyz materials on this card. This is how ZOODIAC was able to bypass the traditional means of Xyz summoning, because this effect was built into every ZOODIAC Xyz monster. This card gains attack and defense equal to the attack and defense of all ZOODIAC monsters attached to it as materials. Once per turn, during either player's turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card, then target one face-up card on the field, destroy it. There was a point in Yu-Gi-Oh's history where ZOODIAC DRIDENT was the most feared card of all time. ZOODIAC DRIDENT was so powerful that other strategies tried to incorporate small ZOODIAC engines just so they could have the ability to play ZOODIAC DRIDENT. While ZOODIAC DRIDENT does have a once per turn clause, it's only a soft once per turn, which means if you're able to get multiple copies of ZOODIAC DRIDENT on the field in successive turns, that means you could be popping multiple cards with multiple copies of DRIDENT. This made it extremely difficult for opponents to play the game because at any point their combo could be interrupted by a well-timed DRIDENT popping whatever monster or spell and trap card they have face up on the field. But even beyond DRIDENT, there are so many powerful ZOODIAC monsters that we don't have time to cover them all. Broad Bull allowed you to search your deck for a Beast Warrior monster. Borbo could attack your opponent directly if you were trying to close out a game. Chakanine allowed you to special summon a ZOODIAC monster back to the field. And Whiptail was a bit of a hand trap of sorts, allowing you to attach it as material at any point, but it would also banish an opposing monster that would battle a ZOODIAC monster at the end of the damage step. ZOODIAC just completely warped competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Until eventually Broad Bull got banned, Drident got banned, and ZOODIAC Barrage also got banned as well. But even though it was one of the most incredibly powerful archetypes ever created, a lot of players revere that time as one of the best times to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of the control style of the deck and the back and forth play style that the deck fostered. Yes, it was one of the most broken archetypes of all time, and yes, it actually in fact broke a summoning mechanic because it did something with that mechanic we had never seen before. But if I had to pick a single card, or in this case an archetype, to be the strongest beast warrior of all time, I think it would have to be undoubtedly ZOODIAC. So guys, that's going to do it for my top 10 beast warrior monsters of all time. Be sure to let me know down in the comments what you guys think and any cards that you feel I might have left out on this list. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.